The Podnews Weekly Review uses chapters. If you're on iPhone, give the Castro app a try. The new release makes chapters look even better.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Podnews Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Podnews.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of True Fans.
I'm releasing 3,000 episodes a week, and I have 8 people on my team. There's no way we're listening to the overwhelming majority of our content before it's released.
Jeanine Wright from Inception Point AI on those AI-generated podcasts. Plus,
we really ought to have an awards that celebrates the industry on the island of Ireland.
Dylan Haskins on the new All-Irish Podcast Awards. And what's the difference between podcasts and radio?
I don't think the audience care.
Stuart Morgan from AudioAlways has his thoughts. This podcast is sponsored by Buzzsprout with the tools, support and community to ensure you keep podcasting. Start podcasting, keep podcasting with Buzzsprout.com.
From your daily newsletter, the Podnews Weekly Review.
AI. Does AI stand for Is Anyone Interested? Because that's what it feels like. Tom Webster's put out a report this week saying AI may be coming to podcasting, but no one can be made to like it. What's he talking about?
What is he talking about? Yes, this is new research which was unveiled by Sounds Profitable this week, showing that some parts of the population are particularly wary, and particularly in terms of this is people who are slightly more educated. And I guess the worry there is if you do have good education, well, perhaps that is what you feel most threatened by with AI. But yeah, it's some good research which you'll find in the Sounds Profitable newsletter this week.
Now, last week at the end of the show, we started to talk about AI tags and maybe people self-reporting and a need for like the explicit tag and AI tag. Well, a company called Adopter Media called for an industry standard, a majority AI disclosure for podcasts. It comes after Inception Point AI were producing 3,000 episodes a week. You were out there with them in Canada last week. Did you have a chance to talk to them at all?
Yeah, I didn't chat with them particularly around this point. There were folks from Adopter Media at the event that I was at, but not the person that I've been talking to here. Yeah, I mean, I think there's absolutely the call for an industry standard disclosure, but not much understanding of how they would do that. And I've tried to get them, involved with the good folks at Podcasting 2.0 to see if they can, if we can both work out the correct way of doing this. There's lots of different ways of doing it, and it really depends what the advertisers want here. So I'm hoping that, if that's a thing that people want to do, then we should go for it. But let's do it the right way and do it the way that the advertisers want to hear.
There are 2 proposals in the Podcasting 2.0 GitHub. One is called the disclosure tag, and the other one is just a standard extension to the person tag. So the disclosure tag, I think, is an overkill right now, where we, as an example, would have to put disclosure, we use Wondercraft. Disclosure, we use Descript. Disclosure, we use whatever. I don't think anyone cares, personally, how the product was produced, pre-production and post-production. I think the biggest, pain point that people feel is this host really AI or is this a real person? I think that's the only thing that I personally care about.
I think it's more than that. Are the words that the host is reading, have they been checked by a human being, or are they totally the output of AI? I think that's actually the thing, which is, majority AI is the word here. If it's human voices, which I have written that, I've got a cold this week, would I prefer that this voice was sounding better? Well, maybe I'll use my AI clone. That's certainly a way of doing it, but it will still be my own voices, my own words. So I think it's a complicated thing. I think it's a nuanced thing, and I'm not sure that the people tag cuts it, and I'm not sure that the disclosure tag cuts it, but in neither of those, I don't think actually matters. I think the most important thing here is what the advertisers want, and we still don't really know what the advertisers are actually wanting out there. Adopter Media calling for a disclosure for majority AI, but not really having any idea of how that disclosure might work. So at the moment, it's up to them really to work out what that plan is.
Well, on the last point on this, I think The reason advertisers are calling for it is because will people be turned off by an AI voiced host, and therefore their ads within it are going to therefore not be consumed by people because they won't listen to it, but they may end up paying for it because it's still within the download. And that may be the reason why they want better disclosure, because maybe they don't want to put their ads into an AI hosted podcast at this time. Maybe in the future people get used to AI voiced hosts and therefore it doesn't become a problem. But you're suggesting that the problem is an AI voice, and I'm suggesting that the problem is AI generated content. My point of concern right now is I find AI hosted voices slightly creepy, in the sense that I know there's no warmth to it. I know that someone's trying to fool me into thinking that this is a real human. I think Yuri Naval said it, in the world of AI, more human connection is better. And I just don't want to have that right now. I don't want that AI voiced interface to what I want to listen to. That's just something I don't want to do. But there's a big difference, obviously, between the words that the AI voice is reading, whether or not those are words which have been through a human being and which have been checked to be actually correct, and whether or not they haven't. I think agree with that. That's more of the issue there. Yeah. So, look, there are some proposals. I think this story is going to be ongoing. So, let's move on, James. Now, I've called this section an inflection point in AI because it's about Inception Point AI. And maybe this is the inflection point. So for the last few weeks, we've covered Inception Point AI. It's been using AI to make podcasts. So tell me more. Yeah.
So last week, we mentioned a story on the Australian ABC, which reported on the AI-generated podcasts that this company has been making. Presenter and journalist Linton Besser summarised it all by saying,
"In researching this and listening to so much AI audio sludge, I can't begin to describe how unsettling it was. A soundscape devoid of the most basic human identity and intelligence. And if that's the future, an audio washing machine of nonsense ideas and synthesised realities, we really are in more trouble than perhaps we know."
Ouch. Well, who better to interview this week than Jeanine Wright?
My name is Jeanine Wright, and I am the CEO of Inception Point AI.
And what does Inception Point AI do, and how do you make shows?
Inception Point AI designs AI-generated personalities and then launches them into the world as 360 creators. And we create AI-generated content on their behalf across multiple different platforms. And we've started and grown up in audio. In the process, we built what we believe to be the world's largest independent podcast company by show count.
From the reviews that I've seen of your work, I'm wondering whether you're being judged a bit too much on the early stuff which is there and not necessarily some of the stuff which is there now.
I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, obviously, that's part of what I said in my piece that we posted. Yeah, I mean, at this point, we've created more than 160,000 episodes. And we've been doing it for more than 2 years. We were very early in experimenting with AI. This was early in our own capabilities and early in AI's capabilities. And a lot of the stuff at the beginning, I mean, frankly, it really sucks. We go back and listen to it and we cringe. But I understand this is a very common thing. I've been working with creators in the podcasting space for many years, and pretty much without fail, everyone is embarrassed about their first episodes, their first season, right? Because it takes a while to get practice and to get good. But I've also been candid that even some of the stuff that we make today might not be good, right? We still do a lot of experimentation, and some of it lands and some of it doesn't. And some of the stuff I really love, and some of the stuff doesn't do it for me, but it does it for other people. And all of those things are okay.
I'm kind of looking at some of the ones that you have been promoting recently, and there are very few listener reviews on there. There's one listener review for Bloom and Banter, which is hosted by Nigel Thistledown, somebody with an accent almost as ridiculous as mine. And that review isn't particularly positive, shall we say? I'm wondering I'm wondering how many people, I mean, frankly, is this an SEO play? Are you there flooding podcast directories with content and hoping that people find that content, in terms of SEO? Or are you actually seeing people coming back again and again?
Well, we're definitely seeing people coming back again and again, which is why we're leaning into many of our personalities. I don't know if it's fair to say like flooding with SEO. There's lots of businesses that make content based on, what people are wanting and searching for. And perhaps that's been a problem with the way that we've been doing podcasting in the past. I mean, at some of the companies that I was at previously, you would make this beautiful, brilliant, incredible show and then title it something that nobody has ever heard of. And then you would have to spend huge amounts of money to invest in telling people that you made this show and this is the title of this show. And then they would go and they would have to type in to candidly, what are these like rudimentary search directories that a lot of these podcast platforms have. And you would hope and pray that they typed in exactly what you titled this show so that they could try and find that. And that was part of what drove up the content production, marketing, and talent costs of making content under this traditional model, which has resulted in, really a widespread, I don't mean to be dramatic, but extinction event across our industry where we're seeing, Stitcher and Gimlet and Wondery layoffs and, Odyssey. And these companies that are just not finding sustainable business models to continue to produce original content or even, partner content profitably. Right. So yes, if I'm going to make, I know I've said this before, if I'm going to make a podcast about whales, we title it Whales, because that way when people are looking for content on whales, they can find our content.
Yeah, it's the Max Cutler way of titling a show, isn't it? He had a serial killers show which was called Serial Killers, and yeah, absolutely,
exactly, yeah. And then it also means because our time to production is dramatically less and our costs of production are less, it means that we can surf trends much better than traditional podcasting organizations. So a week ago when Charlie Kirk was shot, we had content about Charlie Kirk up. We had a living biography. We had a new show about his assassination up within an hour. So when people typed Charlie Kirk into Apple and Spotify, we were 3 of the top 5 shows, even beating out the Daily Mail. The only one that was beating us was the Charlie Kirk show. So that means that we're able to meet a need for content that people want, that they're looking for in that moment. And that has not really ever been part of the commercial podcast business model until now. When his assassin was arrested, we had a new episode up within 15 minutes.
Did a human being check that first?
When we are producing political or news-related content, we especially when it's new shows that we are launching, we listen to the content before it launches. And it's part of the reason why we haven't leaned into news and politics quite yet is because I think there still needs to be human review, and I'm not even going to say editorializing, but still AI is not so great at always capturing the tone of the moment.
Yeah.
And when you are crafting personalities that you want to be complex, you have crafted into these personalities things like senses of humor and flaws and weaknesses and things. And so sometimes they don't always treat sensitive topics with enough sensitivity. They don't strike exactly the right chord. And so as we think about news and politics, we are figuring out how do we build the right infrastructure that still leverages AI and still is consistent with our model, but mitigates the risk of getting it wrong. And that probably means that we need to have a well-known news person who is reviewing that content before it was released and is making sure that we're getting it right and striking the right tone.
Yeah. So human review there is important, but human review for a podcast about whether it's knitting or about gardening isn't necessarily as important.
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of levels of risk, right, associated with the different content. I mean, so we think about which ones need to be much more curated and where we need to be much more careful. And then we also really examine and stay on top of what are the capabilities of the tools, right? AI still struggles with numbers, right? I would not rely on AI to do your math homework, right? So when we're thinking about current, like what are the topics that we want to cover, we lean into the things that we know that AI is really good at, for which we are less concerned about, any potential downside risk. If it's giving, health and wellness advice, we're going to want to make sure that we're doing more to pull from multiple different sources and mitigate against hallucinations, and that somebody is involved in listening and reviewing the content before it's released. But yeah, I mean, I'm releasing 3,000 episodes a week and I have 8 people on my team. There's no way we're listening to all the content. There's no way we're listening to the overwhelming majority of our content before it's released.
There's one podcast directory out there removing AI-generated podcasts from its directory. What's your thought on that?
I think that it's an antiquated thinking. I think that in very short amount of time, if I can make yet another bold prediction, that'll probably cause stir.
You're not going to upset more people, are you?
That seems to be my thing lately. I think that in a very short amount of time, and I would predict certainly less than 24 months and probably less than 12, AI will become the default tool for creating content. And this conversation around is it AI or not, transparency or not, will go away the same way that this happened with, digital photography and photo editing, right? I mean, now nobody makes a disclosure like this picture was taken with a digital camera and was edited after the fact, right? Everybody knows people use digital photography and photo editing. And in fact, nowadays you make a disclosure when something is not captured, that you would say, this is made on traditional 35 millimeter and is not edited, right? Because that's been the thing that's special about it. Already, there was a survey on YouTube where 92% of creators said that they're using AI in their creative process.
Yeah. And I think that there's a difference between using AI as part of your creative process and a difference between using AI as the only part of your creative process.
Well, we're not using AI as the only part of our creative process. And I think that is a very, very nuanced conversation that people don't realize. So right now the standard is, it's been relayed to us and we're kind of following as the community guidelines. If you use AI, it is a material portion of your content. You need to include a disclosure. So we're AI transparent. We include disclosures in all of our content. I know you referenced that.
You didn't do that at the beginning, and now you do. Why did you change your view there?
We were limited because we have so many episodes. We were limited by the API call capacity to be able to dynamically update all of our content. So we were not able to go back quickly to do it with all of our back catalog, but now we were able to build out the process in order to do that. So now if you go through and you see all of our show notes, it's now in all of our content.
Yeah, but you didn't when you started, I guess, is the question. So why did you change your mind and start disclosing that it was AI generated?
You mean like it's 2 years ago when people first started making content? Well, I mean, to be clear, not all of the content that you hear from 2 years ago is AI generated. Many of it is in the voices of people who are on our team. Some of it we went back and then replaced with synthetic voices and personalities that we designed. I mean, at the time, I don't even think people were thinking about how would you make an AI disclosure or not. So, I mean, we've adopted and evolved as the industry evolved. And now I think we're really proud of the way that we're leading the way in transparency. All of our personalities, we have some clever prompt engineering around how we have them do their AI disclosure so that they say that they're AI, but they do it in a way that sells the benefit of having a host that is an AI personality. And from our data, we find, very little, sometimes immeasurable drop off after our AI disclosure. So our read is that if people like the personality and they like the content, they don't care that it's AI.
In the same way as there's an explicit tag in podcasting, where you can mark if you use saucy language or adult discussions, some people have been calling for an AI tag to help audiences or advertisers programmatically filter out majority AI content. What's your view on that?
I think that we're in a moment. Well, I mean, first of all, I think that some people are trying to capitalize on the fear around this conversation to make news for themselves. So the conversation is, if you have people who are really thoughtfully engaging in this conversation, I think the conversation is much more complicated, right? Because if you're using, ChatGPT to make a script, but you're actually reading that into the mic, is that materially AI generated? If you're actually write the script, but you use a synthetic voice, is that material AI generated? If you're doing an interview and it's a real person that's interviewing a digital person, is that AI generated, material AI generated? It's getting to the point now where it's so nuanced. I mean, I've actually had people reach out to me that some of these people who are in this space making commentary that, I can't believe they're doing this, or they need to have disclosure, or, more disclosure. Advertisers aren't going to want this, right? I have people behind the scenes emailing me saying, I work at this company and we're using AI in our process, right? And basically every podcast that I'm doing, some people, going for the jugular, asking me the tough questions about controversy in this space. And then we get off the call and then they say, how do you think that I could better use AI in my process to make my process more efficient? Or could you all recreate my voice? And what would that sound like? And maybe I could actually take a vacation sometime, right? The creators are going to be, this is the most powerful creative tool that the world has ever seen. And creators are going to be leaning in to this technology very quickly. And this conversation is going to go by the wayside. But in the meantime, as people are interested in, we will follow the guidelines as to as much disclosure as you want us to have. The reality is we've not heard any pushback from any advertiser ever. And we are not finding that we're missing out on audiences.
Jeanine Wright speaking to me a little bit earlier this week. I've got obviously opinions on what she said, but it would be unfair to jump in after the interview with my own thoughts because she can't respond to them. But I'm really grateful to her for her time. I've also been sent an email, Sam, and I've been asked to read this out. Opinions in this podcast and in the Podnews newsletter are not the opinions of Podcast Movement, Sounds Profitable, or any associated brands. Imagine how delighted I am to read that out. Anyway, I've read it out now. Let's move on together to a totally different story, and this one is about corporate censorship.
Right. I've put this story in, James, about corporate censorship because I'm asking the question, is Podcast Insects truly censorship resistant? Right. In the light of things that have been happening in the US with Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel. So, censorship is the child of fear and the father of ignorance. And I
look at you quoting. Who's that a quote from?
It says unknown, so I don't know. I'd love to know, but I love the sentence. Look, Jimmy Kimmel is back. I think that was more to do with Disney seeing $4 billion worth of subscriptions removed, not to do with we think Jimmy Kimmel should come back. So let's be critically clear. That is, the reason why he's back.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get into the Kimmel, Colbert, ABC, Disney world. That's outside of it. I wanted to know, will this affect podcasting? Could this happen in the world of podcasting? Could the FCC, the Ofcoms of the world, could they block, remove, ask Apple, Spotify, Podcast Index to remove a podcast?
Yeah. Now, I know you don't want to mention Kimmel, but obviously Kimmel is back, and podcasting got a shout out in his opening monologue.
Should the government be allowed to regulate which podcasts the cell phone companies and Wi-Fi providers are allowed to let you download to make sure they serve the public interest? You think that sounds crazy? No! 10 years ago, this sounded crazy.
Yes. I looked at all of this and, the First Amendment stops the US government from doing anything here. So TV is a little bit different, and hence why Kimmel and, to an extent, Colbert is being talked about, because it's public spectrum that they broadcast on. Cable TV can do whatever it likes, and the FCC only said last week that podcasting is the same. Here's Brendan Carr from the FCC speaking on CNBC.
Broadcast TV is different. We're on a cable show right now. You don't have an FCC license. You don't have an obligation to serve the public interest. Podcasts don't either.
So really, the US government is unlikely to stop anything there. I mean, I suppose, the interesting thing from my point of view is that the US used to have the fairness doctrine for broadcast media, which required media to fairly reflect differing viewpoints. So it made it the law, essentially, to present contrasting views on air, which is very similar to how Ofcom works in the UK as well. But that was abolished in 1987 by Ronald Reagan. And that means that essentially that's led to things like Fox News, very unbalanced output. And to be fair, CNN, which is very unbalanced the other way. And so, from that point of view, that's where the US is going. But, in terms of podcasting, is the podcast index really censorship resistant, you were asking? I think it probably is. But I don't necessarily think it is when it's surfaced in an app. I mean, true fans, presumably, you can choose which of the shows you want to appear on your app, right?
100%, yeah. Yeah, we have final control, yeah.
Yeah, as do we. I mean, Podnews, for example, has a directory which is based both on Podcast Index and on Apple Podcasts. We use a blended results for that. There's one show, for example, that if you search for it, this never made it into a story because I didn't want to excite the lawyer too much that spent three emails shouting at me, but there is a podcast if you search for it, and it takes you to a page which is called "This page is not here anymore" on the Podnews website, and it basically says, look, the podcast's owner employed a lawyer to threaten us to take it away, and they said that the only place it was available, it was on Apple Podcasts, and so I just embedded the Apple Podcasts player.
Yeah, I did have a look at that. Yes.
Yeah, and then stuff that, but yeah, so. So we've had to do that sort of thing as well. So I think the index is censorship resistant, but it's kind of up to apps and websites like us to work out which we want to link to. And I think that goes for, Apple and Spotify too.
Well, again, I think we will see Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert. They've hinted at starting their own podcast network post.
Yes. Well, of course they have.
Yes.
But they could very easily just go onto cable, and there wouldn't be anything in terms of the FCC that would be able to harm them. It comes down to the corporate stuff. I mean, I suppose, you could look at Apple and Spotify, or indeed YouTube. They make choices about what to promote and what not to. So they're already putting a thumb on the scales, I guess. If you look in Canada, where I was last week, the government there is wanting control over what Apple or Spotify promote. The CRTC has basically said that. So we're seeing talk of similar rules in other countries like the UK as well, in terms of, yes, everything might be available, but undue prominence for public service broadcasting is what they're talking about in the UK. So, I guess it's a different conversation, but the Podcast Index, they're very unlikely to take shows out, although they have taken shows out in the past, but they're very unlikely to take shows out for specific political reasons such as that. So, it's really what happens to the apps at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we've seen Facebook remove lots of content based on government requirement. We've seen Elon Musk use Grok recently to stop it reporting on certain activities in the Middle East. It's a worrying thing for me. And this is not a political show, so we will move on. But I do think that the way that governments, not just the US, but governments around the world, are now censoring or applying fear to media companies so that they toe the line. They might not actually say we're banning this, but they will make it very clear that if X doesn't happen, Y will occur.
Yeah.
And you've seen that with the oligarch techs bowing down in the White House. And it's just, I do worry. Which is why I raised the question, could podcasting go down this same road? That was all.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something just to bear in mind. And, we should just bear in mind that the reason why Jimmy Kimmel and all of that stuff came up is not really because of the content of Jimmy Kimmel. It's really because Nexstar, who owns a large number of the ABC affiliates, they're currently in the middle of a $6.2 billion takeover of Tegna. Tegna is another rival broadcaster. And if they need to get that takeover through, then they need a couple of laws changing, and the FCC needs to give them the go-ahead. And so, it's not particularly helpful to them if they've got one of their major talent. Although I did watch Jimmy Kimmel, I did find him tremendously unfunny. But anyway, if it's not particularly helpful to them if one of their major talents is very negative towards the folks that they need to rubber stamp that particular takeover. So, yeah, I think this will come through regardless of whether or not a government is particularly eager or not to ban certain things to be said. If it's business at the end of the day, then I suppose it's business at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yes. I was going to say something about the UN, but I will move on. Right. Comedy hour there anyway.
Yes.
Now, moving on. Descript has a new CEO and some new prices, James. Now, the new prices were announced on Tuesday, and there's a couple of things that I find quite interesting about the pricing. They're moving to something called media minutes and AI credits. Have you had a look at this at all?
I've had a look at, the AI credits are roughly how Wondercraft is charged as well. And I think it probably makes the most amount of sense. It's where the costs are to them. So therefore, that's probably the right way of charging for it. But yes, it's an interesting change to how things are billed for anyway.
I like the use of media hours. Again, one of the conversations you and I have had is about, does the way hosting charges work? So in the sense that today a MP3 file is fully downloaded and therefore it's the number of downloads. So Captivate will talk about the number of downloads. Buzzsprout will talk about the number of hours uploaded. But actually, I think there's a change maybe coming, and I think it's the number of media minutes that you consume or get downloaded and streamed by you as a podcaster. I don't know. I'm fascinated by this. I'm going to be looking at this more closely anyway. I thought I'd just raise it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting in terms of a charging thing. You mentioned that Andrew Mason is no longer the CEO. There is a new CEO, Laura Burkhauser, who has worked with Descript for a while. She was actually named CEO at the end of August, it turns out, and Andrew Mason is now executive chairman. So there's a thing too. Do we know anything more about Laura?
Well, Laura was previously working for Twitter and other companies, so she's been very good in the product role. Andrew Mason said, quite Andrew Mason-ish, the very short answer is Laura is the better CEO for Descript. The longer answer is we are at an exciting moment in Descript. $55 million in average annual revenues, growing 75% year on year. And we're at the beginning of a transformative shift in the company with the launch of our AI video editing agent. Look, Laura's going to be on the show next week. I'm excited to have her. She's going to be talking about her new role, but also future plans. And I will be asking her much more about the way that they're charging now for media hours and AI credits.
Excellent news. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Now, one of the things that you reported in Podnews Daily was Help I Sexted My Boss, the podcast, has unveiled a major new 2026 arena tour. What are they doing, James?
Yes, so the last tour sold 15,000 tickets in 3 hours. This time they are taking the live show to Cardiff, Glasgow, Manchester and London. It's hosted by William Hanson and Jordan North, of course, and produced by AudioAlways.
Yeah, and now one of the interesting things, Stuart Morgan, who's the managing director and founder of AudioAlways, pinged us about some news that they have in terms of growing their team. But I thought it was also a good time to catch up with them because they do things such as producing radio shows and audiobooks. And I think the line is blurring between what is a podcast, what is a radio show, and what is an audiobook. It's content on demand. So I started off by asking Stuart to remind us, who is AudioAlways?
Yeah, so AudioAlways, we are a production company based in Manchester and London. Started at Media City in 2012 when the BBC started to move some money from London to Salford with 5 Live and the various bits that moved up here to Media City. And over that time, we've grown from being a production company that primarily worked on short form audio, trails, station sound, commercial advertising, into a business that now spans content in terms of radio and podcasts and audiobooks and studio facilities. And we've kind of grown and evolved as the industry have as well in terms of Manchester and generally the rise of opportunities around audio and audio content and audio production. We've been part of that and I've been part of it since we started.
Give us some of the names of the podcasts that you've been producing.
From a podcast perspective, so we work on both commissioned podcasts, so people who want to pay us to make podcasts, and also original pods. So commissioned pods, lots of stuff for the BBC, so Alice James and John Robbins, and lots of stuff for kind of BBC Bite Size and factual stuff for Radio 4. We had a great series called The Human Subject, where we looked at the intersection between clinical trials and the morality of it. So lots of kind of podcasts in the commission space. And in the original space, podcasts like Help I Sexted My Boss, for example, Get a Grip with Angela Scanlon and Vicky Patterson, all the way through to parenting podcasts like Secret Mum Club and Made by Mamas, and also actively in the storytelling and true crime space. So stuff like the Pitcairn trials and Carrie Jade Does Not Exist, and also always on factual true crime like UK True Crime and Murder Mile are all part of our network. So yeah, a wide mix of, from a podcast perspective, both commissioned and original pods in a couple of different verticals.
So you've done something new. You've expanded your team at Media City. What have you done?
I think it's reacting really to that sense of the changing world between commissioned pods and original pods, and also just that kind of trying to take away some of that sense of podcast and radio. You know, I think you speak to most managers of audio production companies, it's always kind of hard to find that balance of what do you integrate podcasts into radio and how do they intersect. And what we've tried to do is sort of remove some of those barriers between the skill sets that go into creating some of our radio shows, some of radio strands, bringing that experience into podcast and vice versa, as that kind of convergence between radio, podcasts and audio books happens across the industry. So we've got 3 great new content directors who are working across all of our projects, all of our radio, podcast and audiobook projects, bringing a vast amount of experience. We've got Sam Davis, who's been across our 6 music content for many, many years here in Salford. So he's looking after our commissioned content. Linny, who before us was doing a great job at Folded Wing, another fantastic indie, and do amazing stuff in that commissioned and original space. He's looking after commissioned and original content. And also Ben Cartwright, who is our content director specifically around original content. He's been part of the team right since the inception of Help I Sexted My Boss, which is a kind of a big hit, commercially successful original podcast for us. So he's bringing that experience across all of our originals now.
I like the way that you talked about the convergence, because I had a radio station where we did 40 live shows a week, but we then automatically turned those into podcasts. But you can look at Radio 4 scheduling, for example, and they will have a program that's pre-recorded, which you could argue, is that a podcast? Is it dumped into the schedule so it appears at the time? So the Friday Night Comedy Podcast, for example, is not live often. It is a pre-record. So where is the line blurring? For me, I always say separate the content from the distribution. So the content can be the content. It could be a show that you've recorded. And then is it distributed via FM, DAB, or is it distributed by the web or an Alexa, or is it distributed by another means? So is the line for you as someone who's producing for radio and producing podcasts, is there a difference anymore? I mean, you talked about the skill sets transferring between radio and podcasting. What differences do you see?
I don't think the audience care, really. I think, we get obsessed with these words because we are audio people and we love it, and we know radio, we know podcasts, and we're in it. To a listener, they don't care how it's categorized. They just want to, as you say, press play wherever they're pressing play and get the content they want. And you look at examples like James and John Robbins on 5 Live. It's on 5 Live, but for most people, they're consuming it on Sounds, on RSS feeds, and they don't really care where they're getting it from. So I think the convergence from an audience perspective is sort of happening already. And I'd say the same with audiobooks and podcasts. We produce audiobooks here at AudioAlways, and we do a lot of stuff out of Salford with Northern authors, Northern publishers, Northern readers. But we also have podcasts, which are in effect audiobooks. They are people telling amazing stories that, if it was written down on a piece of paper, could be published. And we're seeing that in the podcast space, that people are pressing play on podcasts that sound like audiobooks, and then on Spotify they're clicking to an audiobook. So I think that convergence from an audience perspective has been happening for a long time. For us, there are some kind of internal distinctions that you just have to make, and I think part of our thinking is, yes, there are some skills and experience that go with intricacies around distribution channels and commercializing stuff in different ways. But we're trying to align our production processes as much as we can, because the efficiencies that we can make and the industry can make in terms of blurring those lines are important. But there's also a lot of learns from radio. Before AudioAlways, I spent my years pre-indie sector in commercial radio, and a lot of what we are doing now from an original podcast perspective it's the same fundamentals that we were doing on breakfast shows in major markets before podcasts were what they were.
So coming from a commercial radio background, here's a question for you. Have we got the same level of advertising saturation within podcasting? So radio used to be, for me, every 15 minutes you'd have a bank of ads, and then every 15 minutes there'd be the news and whatever. Are we going to end up with that element of radio commercialization coming to podcast commercialization?
I think a lot of that is the interpretation of what is saturation. There were times, radio stations I worked for, where we were on 12, 13, 14 minutes of ads an hour. Was that having a detrimental effect on the audience? Sometimes not. With podcasts, I think we're existing in an interesting world of podcasts, because I think the audiences that are happy to have that level of saturation, however it's described, can get that on RSS. I think there are intricacies around paid for models, where maybe if you are happy to get the content and pay for it but don't want the adverts, you can get it. There are platforms that are offering ad free. A lot of our pods are licensed on BBC Sounds and they're ad free. So I think the difference for me is there's probably just an additional level of choice that audiences now have in terms of where they're consuming their content and how willing they are to have that level of commercial content. But I also think some of the creative stuff that we do, we work a lot with Acast. There are some amazing examples across the industry of how that commercial messaging and how those revenue models can be integrated into content in ways that doesn't feel like the music stopping and you're just getting a load of adverts and then it's coming back. A lot of our revenue streams from a podcast perspective come from a subscription and from live touring, and we've just announced a big live arena tour for one of our podcasts. I think that's where hopefully podcasting won't fall into that trap of we just need to just put adverts in between songs to make it work. But I also think it's fair to say that commercial radio, I feel like, is doing a better job of that, as well as they look to ways of diversifying their models to make it so the audience are not bombarded with commercial messaging.
I've always said podcasting is a digital second-class citizen, in that we now accept we will pay for music, we accept we will pay for films, audiobooks, and other means of content. But the perception has always been that podcasting is free and is ad-supported. I know there's a big move towards subscription-based now. But why is audiobooks treated differently from podcasting when, I think you said earlier, fundamentally they're the same thing in pretty much the way that they're produced and also distributed?
I think it's just because at the start of that process, there were major publishers involved, and there still are, that the model and the route to getting that live, people paid for it. That's what people expected. You buy a book and you can either buy it in paper or you can buy it in your ears. And that's just what the audience expectation was and still is. I think podcasting, the brilliance of podcasting is that it started as a cottage industry, and it was people in their bedrooms, and it was people doing it and recording it, and that's where that expectation has come from. Does it always have to be that way? No. Is it good that it is really easy to start one to be able to get it? I think it is. So I don't necessarily see it as. I think it's a challenge to make a direct comparison between those kind of models for me, because you could say the same for radio. Why would somebody listen to a BBC station versus commercial when they're getting ads on one and not the other? I think a lot of it is just down to what people are used to, and podcasting started in a way that meant that it was free and it was easy to kind of press play on it. Although interestingly, we find a lot of research we do is there's still quite a large proportion of the audience who don't realise that podcasting is free and you have to pay for it. So I think the educational journey that the industry has to do as podcasting grows, in the same way that audiobooks have to communicate to their listeners and that audience that you can get audiobooks as part of a subscription on Spotify, for example. This stuff will always move and change, and I think it's on us to be with it and help hold listeners' hands as stuff evolves, really.
Talking about change and evolving, when are you renaming to AudioAlways? Will you be a video platform? Where is AudioAlways in the video discussion?
AudioAlways, video most of the time, but I wish I had a crystal ball 13 years ago when coming up with a name. I think we are, in terms of our original podcasts, we're video across everything. In visual podcast studios, we've got staff working across video, in the same way we have staff working across audio. So as a business, we are very much delivering video in the same way that a lot of our competitors are and are doing a great job. We're nominated in the Video Innovation Awards at the BPA's coming up. We're proud to be part of that. I think the thing that we say is, though, that we're not a video company, and I think that's a distinction that we make with our name. And what we do is that kind of audio product does come first. We want to make sure that things, sound great technically, but also the root is audio. It's what we do, and it's what makes us different. Video, social, the stuff that goes around it is all about enhancing and amplifying that. So would we be going out and pitching for TV shows? No, that's not in our world. Do we want to be making a YouTube series without that kind of audio crossover? Strategically, no, not right now. But if we have an amazing audio podcast and we've got an audience that we know would want to get more of that on YouTube, then we're absolutely behind that. And I think that it's wise for all of us in the industry to be embracing all of those ways that listeners can consume what we do, where they are and where they're listening, watching, and consuming that content.
Now, the other hot topic, of course, is AI. I don't have any issue about AI in the pre-production and post-production of podcasting, as in research or editing. But I don't know whether you call it the creepy line or people's dislike to the sound. But where do you stand on using AI for hosting?
I mean, I don't believe that audiences would want to listen to an AI host. There are intricacies and beautiful things that come with human interaction that just can't be replicated. So I think it feels like, certainly for us, we're a long way off that in terms of that kind of, the hosting, AI in the production process. We use it, it makes it more efficient in certain places, but you can never get away from that kind of human touch, that listen, how stuff feels and what's that mood and that tone. And I think that's where, AI isn't doing that job, and I'm not sure it will in the next couple of years. I think it's more interesting for me in that kind of audiobook space. Again, does somebody want to listen to 8 hours of an audiobook read by AI? Probably not. When stuff's written, the nuances and the beautifulness of some of the text that we work on here, you just couldn't replicate that, certainly at the moment, in AI. But is there a longer way of being able to deliver longer form content to audiences with the help of AI? Maybe. But who knows? I think the world is moving quick, and all we can do as an industry is be part of it and do what feels right. I think also, especially with what the audience want. I'm a kind of a techie geek and I love trying all these things out. But for me, it comes down to what does that listener, that viewer want, and how can we best deliver that? If it's AI, then great. If it's not, then we stick to what we do.
And you talked about live events as a means of merchandising and monetization. Do you, as AudioAlways, look at anything to do with live podcasting? Again, I only mention it because of your background in radio, and I'm a firm believer that I think the lines will blur quite quickly between what is radio when you say it's distributed over FM or DAB, but what is radio when it's distributed over a podcast app, because live podcasting would be the same thing. So do you have any work that you're looking at with live podcasting, or you don't see anything on your horizon right now?
There are a couple of examples. On Friday night, we're doing a live stream for one of our podcasts on Instagram. Is that a live podcast? Probably yes, in the minds of the audience. Are we defining it as a live podcast? Probably not. Could we overthink how we're defining this stuff and get caught up in it? Probably. Back to what I said earlier, I think if we are able to give the audience what they want, where they're listening in audio form or audio and video form, as we're doing with the live stream, then it works. I think the interesting thing as well for me is around how we can use events and live and that as a revenue stream whilst also generating revenue. We work with Drunk Women Solving Crime as an example, and a big part of them is residency in terms of live. So they will, in effect, rather than record their podcast in a studio, they will record it in front of an audience. And there's some really interesting examples across the industry of that. And also, we did Help Us Sex My Boss live into cinemas last year in the same time as we were doing it at the Palladium. So I think although we don't strategically try and do it, I think those lines are blurred. And for us, it's about going podcast by podcast. There are some podcasts that work well in that space. There's some that wouldn't work well. It's just about making sure that we're reacting and putting that content live, pre-recorded, where we know the audience will be.
Stuart Morgan, Managing Director and founder of AudioAlways. Thank you so much. Congratulations on the new hires, and come back sooner than 2 years. I think it's been since you were last on. So yes, you're always welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The Podnews Weekly Review with Buzzsprout. Start podcasting, keep podcasting.
All right, let's move on. And congratulations in Barcelona. Congratulations, Barcelona, particularly Evooks, who has unveiled a new brand identity, and they are celebrating their 15th anniversary. I really like their new brand identity. It looks very smart. You can see it linked from Podnews this week. They have, of course, a big Spanish language podcast platform. Fascinating company. It'd be really interesting to learn more about how they work.
Yeah, going to be in Madrid next week. So I'm hoping that I might be able to catch up with the iVooks team and maybe get them on here to do an interview.
Yes, that would be excellent. See whether you can do that. Let's go and have a quick look at some jobs. And Jonathan Menjivar has been hired by The Guardian to produce The Guardian's first US video podcast. He was with Pineapple Street Studios, but has also worked in public media in the US as well. Audio Boom has named Craig Eastwood as Vice President International. He was previously Commercial Operations Director at Adelicious, which Audio Boom acquired in July, which is exciting. Let's have a look for some awards and events. And the Independent Podcast Awards announced its 2025 shortlist. The event is on October the 15th in London. Harriet Kemsley will be one of the big stars at the Independent Podcast Awards. She is hosting. She, of course, not just an excellent comedian, also an excellent podcaster as well. Another one of the stars giving out one of the awards is going to be this very podcast's Sam Sethi. So that'll be exciting, won't it?
Yes, only because you're not available again. Yes. Who said Tonto? Right. Yes. There we go.
Yes.
The 7th annual Afros and Audio Podcast Festival is taking place. It's Uniting Black Podcasts. That'll be in Baltimore, Maryland, USA on October the 16th.
Yes, and it's their final one as well, so I wish them all of the best for that. The Signal Awards has also revealed the finalists for this year's awards. They've opened voting for the Listener's Choice Awards in every category as well. You've until October the 9th to vote if you wish, and the winners are given away on October the 15th as well. I was talking about the Independent Podcast Awards and how good it was that they'd managed to get a storefront in the Apple Podcasts app, and you've managed to get storefronts for a bunch of different awards in True Fans, haven't you, Sam?
Yeah, we've just launched our new awards page. We do it in a different way. So each award page is a dedicated page, and it has a carousel of all of the awards. So we do it, first of all, the nominees, and then we will whittle that down to the finalists, and then we'll whittle it down eventually to the winners. So it'll be constantly edited. But what's nice about it is you can create a single playlist from it. So we have made it a playlist that you can then click. So if you just want to hear all the award winners from, let's say, the British Podcast Awards, you click the playlist and it'll play one after the other. And it'll play the latest episode as well, because it's what we call a dynamic playlist.
Yes, very fancy, although that's a lot of hard work. But
yes. But, you know, I think it's worth it because what we... Yeah, and I think what's nice about it is we link it back. So when you become a nominee for whatever award, we then put a logo on your podcast page saying that you're now a nominee for this award and you whatever. Yeah. So again, you know, trying to highlight podcasts that are doing well and promote them.
Now, a couple of events to talk about. Podcast Days in Spain is a month or so away, or in Madrid on the 2nd to the 3rd of October. Some of the incredible international stars that you can see there include Megan Davies from Acast, Eric Newsom from Magnificent Noise, and Sam Sethi from this very podcast. So that should be fun. Also,
you know, my intro is going to be, I'm so sorry James couldn't make it.
I wouldn't say that. Also, SpeakFest, October the 10th in Houston in Texas, the Night of the Living Pod, a fun-looking podcast conference there. Italy's Podcasting Festival has returned for its 10th year. It's on right now. There'll be a big global online event on September the 30th. I'm going to be one of the speakers there. And in Ireland, a new 2-day podcast summit has been launched. The event is called Soundwave. It'll be held in November in Adair, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in County Limerick. Apparently it's Ireland's prettiest village. So that's exciting. And included in that is the All Ireland Podcast Awards. And head judge for that is Dylan Haskins, who is also commissioning podcasts for BBC Sounds and Radio 5 Live. And Sam, you managed to catch up with him.
So it is the inaugural year. It's the first time we've done this. There's been various kind of iterations of different podcast awards in Ireland over the past few years that and there was a big kind of gaping hole there that we thought that's crazy and we really ought to have an awards that celebrates the industry on the island of Ireland and the full island rather than just kind of the Republic of Ireland. So that's kind of why it's the All Ireland Podcast Awards as well.
Yeah, there were a Irish Podcast Awards from PodPod a few years ago. I don't know what's happened to those, but the event that you've got is when and where?
The All Ireland Podcast Awards are happening together with Soundwaves, which is a new 2-day conference that's happening kind of on the business of podcasting, music and sport, and kind of looking at all three of those together. But the awards are on the night of the 13th of November, and they're happening in Adair in Limerick, which is one of the most beautiful villages in Ireland. So what's happening is we have people coming in on the Wednesday, and the Wednesday night there'll be kind of a small kind of music trail in the town, which should be good fun. And then on the night of the 13th, as I said, yeah.
Now, what sort of categories have people been entering for these awards?
We kind of, you know, you can kind of have an infinite number of categories, and it's really hard to try and pick ones that cover enough. So we've got there's 8 at the moment. So we've got a current affairs and politics, which kind of covers all of your news stuff and your more opinionated kind of discussion about politics all in the one. There's an audio drama and documentary. So that's kind of unusual, I suppose. We lumped the narrative stuff into this one category, looking really at kind of scripted and non-fiction narrative storytelling. There's a category, an entertainment category, which would be one of the quite broad ones, a sport category, business innovation, conversation, which should cover quite a lot as well, and then a kind of spotlight award, which is the judge's kind of discretion one. That's not one for being kind of people submitting themselves. For all the other categories, people have been able to nominate themselves for. It's been free to enter for the first year as well, because we wanted to kind of get as many people involved as possible as well. So we've had a ton of entries. The entries have actually closed now for this year. So it's too late if anyone's listening to enter, but I hope this will be the first year or something that will continue into the future.
Of the category for eligibility, podcast host or producer holds an Irish passport. The podcast host or producer is a resident of Ireland, and the podcast production takes place in Ireland. So it's very clearly the All Irish Podcast Awards. There is no one sneaking in on the back of that one there.
No, and there's quite a few Irish connection or Irish perceived podcasts or produced podcasts with Irish people that are produced from the UK, for example, something like My Therapist Ghosted Me as well, which is one of the biggest podcasts in the UK. You know, it's made for global, but it's also 2 Irish hosts on it as well. So we wanted to think as broadly as possible than just those who are in Ireland at the moment as well, because we're thinking more about what's listened to in Ireland as opposed to just who's always just based here as well, you know?
The event that's running alongside it, Soundwaves, I think you've picked 3 really hot topics. Obviously, podcasting, music and sport. They seem to be the real trendsetters. And what's the sort of discussions you're hoping to have around those 3 topics?
The one thing that's kind of common in all of them really is, how do you make a living from these industries, and how do you do something in a way that's viable and sustainable? That's absolutely the case in music, and it's the case in podcasts as well. So thinking about all of the different ways that you can make a living and monetize podcasts and IP is, I think, one of the biggest topics in the industry generally, but it's really important to be thinking about that in the context of Ireland as well. You know, a lot of ad buys are sold by kind of bigger networks across a range of inventory. And that works in certain markets as well. And it mightn't always be the right fit though as well. Some people have really, really dedicated, audiences or subscriber based shows as well, and are doing deals directly with brands themselves as well. So there's a kind of a whole range. And in a market that like Ireland, that's relatively small compared to the US and even to the UK. And the UK is small relative to the US, and Ireland is small relative to the UK there. And a lot of the infrastructure that kind of supports the Irish market flows through the UK or through European companies as well. So really just trying to get all of the industry together and start talking to each other and kind of advocating for the industry as a whole. And also seeing what we learn from kind of comparable industries. Music is a really interesting one. I've always thought about music industry in terms of how you market a podcast, for example, and thinking about how when you've got an exciting new band, you don't necessarily want to have a load of billboards around from day one, because none of the cool people will want to listen to something if it's on billboards from day one. So you kind of start with building that fandom by seeding it out, and you grow it. And then you do the billboards when you've kind of reached a critical mass, if you can, at that point. And I've always thought about that with how record labels would have managed bands, putting a 7-inch record out on a small kind of indie label first, even if they were signed to the major, and just thinking about a longer term view of how you grow an audience around a podcast and market it. So that's just one example of, where I've seen parallels in the industry as well. But sometimes when you have people from different but adjacent industries, you can learn a lot from each other, more so even than when you're just with people who are in exactly the same area as you.
I like the analogy of how you build fandom around a band, and it's the same way for what people are now looking to do. Monetization comes later from that. You don't want to start day one monetizing. I mean, some people may be able to do it, but most don't.
Well, actually, there's quite a lot of Irish podcasts that do really well with subscribers, and it might be, 3,000 to 5,000 subscribers. That is sustaining an entire show and a kind of team behind that as well. So that bit is something that is kind of quite strong in Ireland as well, and hopefully people can kind of learn from each other about different strategies as well.
A weird point where we might have too many podcasts. Do we have saturation or oversaturation? When I think of sports podcasts, I've heard about 7 women's news sports podcasts launching. I've heard about 10 men's rugby podcasts launching. It seems anyone who's ever played the game launches a podcast. Anyone who's ever, been in the music industry has a podcast. Are we reaching a point where there are too many podcasts out there?
There are definitely a lot of podcasts out there, but I think I think the proof is always in the audience and the numbers, and do people want to listen to it? And also having volume kind of raises the bar for everyone as well, because to cut through, you need to be better. You need to make something that is more compelling than the other stuff. And so that is, I always find that quite an exciting challenge. It's gotten harder to cut through than it was maybe 5 years ago, you know? And in some areas, actually, I would say maybe in the narrative space, it's not as hard to cut through now, because far few people are making and commissioning big narrative series now in the past 2 years, you know? So actually, there actually isn't a saturation in narrative series at the moment. There is in probably the always on kind of conversation series. There are a lot of them, but it's a kind of it's a few small ones at the top that probably have the massive share of the listening there, and then a large kind of tail of much more modest listening, you know.
Again, looking at the monetization element, is there anything other than talking about advertising? Is there any talk about subscription-based models or micropayment models? How are you going to look at monetization?
Yeah, well, I know that the micropayment models is a topic close to your heart for sure. And it's really looking at the range of all the different ways. So absolutely subscription stuff, absolutely kind of ad sales, working with brands in a more kind of direct way, looking at the kind of full package around IP. So looking at live shows and how you do live shows as a more longer term rather than kind of a one-off thing as well. And there's lots of really great people who can speak to that so well. So, you know, the Soundwaves conference as well, one of the organizers on it is Joe Clark, who's one of the managers for, or one of the podcasts that he manages is The Two Johnnies, which is, you know, the biggest podcast in Ireland in terms of its listening. They had some incredible stat, like let me just check what it was. Yeah, they had some incredible stat that it was like 3 out of 10 18 to 25s in Ireland would identify as a listener of the podcast. Crazy stuff. I'll source that directly to Joe, and they actually did a Red Sea poll on that. So there is they've been really successful, and having someone like Joe involved, who's been very much behind kind of the business side of that show as well, in the awards as well, will really kind of, I think, lends kind of credibility to who people will be hearing from in these discussions. And there'll be a ton of people that have been kind of invited in to speak on the various kind of panel discussions as well. And it'll be relatively small, like we're probably looking at around 200 people for the conference. So people should be able to talk to each other as well. This isn't going to be a big, you know, a massive conference with thousands of people coming through the door. It's relatively small, and we just want to get all of the kind of main people who are doing this and trying to make it work in Ireland together, as well as their kind of international people that they work with and the various different companies that distribute podcasts or host podcasts as well.
Dylan, thank you so much. Look, remind everyone, where's the website where they can get tickets? So the website is soundwaves.ie. It's on the 12th and 13th of November. And the tickets, there's 3 different. So conference only is €75, or there's a 2-night accommodation package, which is €280. And there's also €180 1-night accommodation package as well. So that's basically, you know, you kind of want to come over, do the 2 nights, go on the music trail, have a good time in Adair, which has some great pubs and is a beautiful village. But also the awards, we've closed the entries for the awards now, but I'm hoping this is the first of many years. I know with the conference, it's something we're hoping to do for a few years. The reason it's happening in Limerick is the Ryder Cup is coming to Limerick in 2027. So we've had some kind of funding and support around that for bringing the conference to Limerick as well from the County Council and City Council there. So get booking your ticket. Ellen, thank you so much. Good luck with it all. Cheers, Sam. Thanks a million.
Hey, you with the ears. If you like this show, you'll love the Podnews newsletter. It comes out every day, right in your email. It's got news about the industry and events and jobs and occasional sarcastic opinions, which apparently we need to make clear aren't the opinions of anyone other than the editor. You can subscribe for free to the Podnews newsletter today at podnews.net. Right then, back to these two guys.
The Podnews Weekly Review with Buzzsprout. Start podcasting, keep podcasting.
Right, something exciting is happening in March next year. I will be in Riga in Latvia, possibly. But also, pre-registrations are now open for the 4th edition of the charity podcast movement, Podcastthon. This is a fascinating thing. It's basically a way for podcasters to talk about their favourite charities, to dedicate one episode to a non-profit of their choice. Now, last year, 1,500 podcasters from 40 countries took part. This year it should be even bigger because for the first time the event is also welcoming Spanish-speaking podcasters as well. It's worth a peek. You can find out more information just by searching for Podcastthon and finding out more information about that. And obviously, take part if you can. That's a wonderful thing. What else is going on? There's a fascinating story, not very much, frankly, to do with podcasting, but kind of is, I suppose, a fascinating article by Ryan Farley, worth a read. It's called The Story of How RSS Beat Microsoft. And you had a hand in a little bit of that, I think, Mr. Sethi, didn't you?
Yeah, I was involved in the browser wars. They were fun. It was great times. Microsoft did everything they could to kill it, from introducing ICE, which was
nobody likes ICE.
Really poor idea. Introducing ActiveX. If you remember ActiveX, and also, and it's public domain, so I'm not going to get sued, bribing certain corporate companies like the BBC to remove Netscape's browser and replace it with IE because they had deeper pockets than Netscape. So yeah, Microsoft did everything they could. The eventual goal was to have a closed proprietary environment called MSN. That was the original Bill Gates goal. The walls of that came down when they lost. And, obviously the European Union and then the DOJ removed Microsoft's power of the IE browser. But, it's a fascinating history story. Have a look at it.
Yes, and there's some wonderful things back in the history books. Like, for example, now how do you pronounce this? ZDNet? I would pronounce it ZDNet. Yes, but is it really ZDNet? Gosh, there's a thing. Anyway, a piece from 1997 where somebody from Netscape, Sam Sethi, marketing manager, ends up being uncharacteristically rude about Internet Explorer, which was made the default browser for the Macintosh. Gosh, I don't even remember that back in 1997. And Sam Sethi is quoted here as saying Microsoft was giving away the browser and now they're paying people to take it. Bill probably earned that much in his sleep last night. Gosh.
Yes.
So there's a thing.
Yes, Apple Podcasts, the IE7 of podcasting. Sorry, did I say that again?
Gosh, there's a thing. Anyway, let's move on.
The tech stuff on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Podnews newsletter. Here's where Sam talks technology.
Well, maybe I shouldn't. Right, Pocket Cast. We've talked about how they added ads into the app and there's been a backlash. But also, one stage further, James, somebody called Matthew Brunel has done something different. What's he done?
Yeah, well, he has said, the code for the app is open source. And so therefore I can just pop into the code, make a fork of the code and get rid of the call for the ads. And hey, presto. So I'm kind of looking at that and thinking I'm not so sure that that's the right plan. Firstly, the premise of what he's saying is that Pocket Casts have changed the rules. I bought this app a long time ago and now I'm seeing ads in it. Well, my understanding is that if you are a grandfathered paid account, you don't get the advertising anyway. So, they've not really changed anything. But also, secondly, is it really the plan to use the fact that Pocket Casts have very cleverly made the code for their app open source so that other people can add additional features into it? Is the plan really to punish them for that and get rid of the ads? I think, really, Matthew, if you're going to do something, then either just pay the money because it's a really good app, or go away and use, the Apple Podcast app if you're on iOS, or AntennaPod, which is the one that I would recommend if you're on Android. Those are both great apps. They both work in much the same sort of way. Both of those don't have advertising in them. I think that's probably a good thing. So I'm a little bit grumpy, Matthew, for doing this, but I'm sure that he feels very clever. To be fair, what he has done is he's said how to change the code, but what he hasn't done is just uploaded an APK for you to download onto your Android phone without the ads, because I think that would be a little bit cheeky. So at the very least, you still need the intelligence to go in and work out exactly how you're going to rebuild, recompile the app and all of that kind of thing. But I do think that that's a little bit cheeky. I don't know what you think there, Sam.
No, I think it's just maybe throwing a shot across the bow at podcasts, saying, look, hey, think about what you're doing, because we can do this, because you've made it open source. I think he's not trying to undermine Pocket Cast completely. He's just showing it's possible. I think your point within it, though, in the article was podcasts do need a way to earn money, right?
Yeah.
I don't believe pro accounts... Pocket Cast put out some numbers. I'm not sure I fully agree with the numbers in terms of how many people are paying for their pro account. I'd be surprised if the numbers are factual. But that said, they may well be. So, but I've talked to Oscar, I've talked to other app developers, and the number of people who pay for pro accounts is very small. So that's not how we're generating our revenues. It's going to come from other mechanisms. Now, if this is the way that Pocket Cast thinks they can monetize, or like YouTube and like Spotify, put in enough embuggerance, here's an ad, here's another ad, here's another ad, I'll bugger it, I'll just pay the pro account, which is what I do with YouTube, right? I couldn't use YouTube the way it works, so I paid my $16.99. I'm waiting for the $7.99 account, but $16.99, and it's now a usable app. So maybe they're doing it for that reason. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at the end of it, nobody wants to work for free. So either we have great podcast apps, or we just allow Spotify and YouTube and Apple to run this world. The exciting thing is I was in Canada, for example, last week. I did some work with OP3 to discover that over a typical week, I think 94 different podcast apps are used in Canada alone. Now, 94 is a pretty nice large number. And if we don't want to benefit those podcast app developers at all, then we will essentially continue seeding the entire industry to just Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube. And that's not a particularly healthy place to go. If podcasting is a $7 billion industry, which apparently it is, then that $7 billion by making podcasts, surely we can share some of that with the podcast app developers to actually work on our future there. And unfortunately, it's not going to be done with, streaming sats, because that's never going to hit the mainstream. So therefore, we kind of need to work out other things. I mean, to me, one of the simplest and most obvious things is that if some kind of share in the money that podcasters are paid by audiences. So whether that's your own secure RSS thing, whether that is just a simple affiliate deal with Supporting Cast and those sorts of people, or indeed, Apple Podcasts has its own affiliate, but obviously that only works in Apple Podcasts. So, but whether or not it's an affiliate deal like that or something else, I don't really know. But some way of sharing in some of the revenue would be good, so that podcast app developers get money depending on how much the podcast app is actually used.
I heartily agree with what you just said. I think, if you remember, I proposed a podcast fund when the PSP was part of what I was doing. Yeah. And my thoughts there were, look, you look at Mitch Downey at Podverse, you look at Oscar and Nick over at Fountain, myself, you look at, Jason at Podcast Guru, etc., etc. Podfriend is now pretty much gone. There's no work being done on it. We haven't heard anything from Mitch Downey. I haven't heard anything from Fountain, actually. Maybe other people have, but I haven't heard anything from those guys for months. I'm not saying they're going away, but they seem very quiet. All of us are trying to make a living. We're all trying to support the Podcasting 2.0 namespace. We are trying to make our apps more attractive than the mainstream apps. And, it does take time and it does take money and effort. And one of the thoughts I had was the money currently in the ecosystem is with the hosts. That's where the money resides. The pro accounts aren't going to work. So, and the micropayments thing, as you said, isn't going to pay the bills. So there are two things to it. One, hosts could, I'm not saying they should, but they could put a small fund together. That would be like a seed fund. Now, I'm not saying give us money for nothing, but it could be done on the number of tags that we support would mean that we'd get an increase in the amount we get paid. That would be an incentive. We could give equity away back to the PSP as a fund owner. So they would be the angel fund owner. And, if we then did grow and sell in the future, that money would then come back into the PSP for the next round of developers. I'm just saying we need to think differently because the money is not going to come from Spotify, Apple or YouTube to any of the Podcasting 2.0 apps. And if we all go away, and we could, the elastic string is not forever and a day. That's what you will be left with, Spotify, Apple and YouTube.
Yeah, no, I do think that there's something worthwhile having a think about, and it might be advertising funded, but I can't really see that. I'm not sure that the host should be paying because the hosts seem to me to be right at the bottom of the value chain here, nowhere near the top, which is, the money from advertising and the money from paid subscriptions coming in. I mean, to my view, the success here is probably through companies like Patreon, Supercast, Supporting Cast, and similar ones. Of just, put a great big button in there, use the funding tag to link to Supporting Cast and Patreon and those sorts of things. Make sure that funding button is as big as you possibly can, and we will give you the first month of support, for example. If you're a podcast app, we'll give you the first month of support for anybody that comes in through your app. I mean, that to me is a really simple, straightforward way. It would mean that the funding tag would get much more promotion anyway, which is good news for everybody, but would also mean that money comes back in terms of affiliate deals, which are, everybody understands how those work. So, I mean, I think that would be a simple way. Interestingly, one person contacted me and said that why don't Pocket Casts just put ads in front of the podcast. So you press the play button and you hear an ad which is paid for by Pocket Casts. And then after that, it plays the ad. And I thought, well, that's dreadful. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute. YouTube does exactly that. And we seem to be fine with it on YouTube, but we don't seem to be fine with it in a podcast app. What's the deal there? I think it's an interesting question, isn't it? Why is it okay for YouTube to do that, and indeed for Spotify to do something similar to that, but it's not okay for a podcast app to end up doing that?
Well, that's because need and must, right? You don't need the Podcasting 2.0 apps. There are plenty of apps. 94, I think you said in Canada alone you were looking at. So the alternative is as true fans, I could do that. And then everyone goes, bugger you. I'm going to go and use Fountain. I'm going to use somebody else. I'm going to use whatever, right? So it has to be a collective or not at all. Whereas when you've got a mass audience and you are a big player or maybe the only player in the market like YouTube, then you can do whatever you like because the embuggerance of getting to the content is enough. And there's an alternative, which is pay us, and then you don't get this problem. So I don't think we can, in the podcasting space, do this. I think the thing that you mentioned about Patreon and Memberful, that's where I see the biggest money for certainly true fans with my hat on as a CEO. That's the money I'm after. I'm not after the advertising money. I'm after the subscription-based, regular, recurring revenues. And I think at the moment, I don't know if Patreon would do an affiliate deal. Maybe I've got to go and knock on the door and ask. But I certainly believe that secure RSS, which is something I'm certainly going to be focusing on for the next 6 months heavily, is where I think the money will be, because that is people not using the funding tag for me as true fans, sending the user across to another site to register to then get a private feed to then work. I don't like that whole model. Yeah, indeed. I think...
No, I can see that works from a business point of view. I suppose the question is, you need something that works everywhere. And I suppose that's the question there.
Well, does Patreon work everywhere?
With the exception
Does
of...
it?
Yes. I was going to say with the exception of Spotify, but no, it works in Spotify as well. So yes.
Yeah, well, as we've said before, I think Spotify may be with SOA having a look at the revenue that it's giving Patreon and saying, hello, why are we doing that? I think there's going to be a big change. But anyway, let's move on.
I should just say, by the way, 94 apps in Canada. I forgot what the global number was. This is just in a typical week. In a typical week, the global number is 185 different apps are being used. 185. That's a pretty impressive number, isn't it? And yes, if you look at downloads, Apple Podcasts and Spotify by themselves account for almost 2/3. But that means that a third, or slightly over that, is being used by all of the other apps out there. And that's a tremendously vibrant industry. And what we don't want to see is that to go away.
No, I agree. Now, talking money, James, Alby have announced that they're looking at adding bank accounts to the Alby Hub.
Excellent. I'm sure.
Do you want me to say more?
I'm sure the two people that use the Alby Hub will be delighted.
No, okay, yeah. Obviously, True Fans does, and
yes,
it works for us. But the bank account thing is quite interesting because the way that we have to top up the Alby Hub right now is through MoonPay or third-party banks, right? And what would be nice is that we would have an Alby Hub and an Alby bank account, and therefore we could set it up as one hit, and I don't have to keep going back in and doing KYC to the MoonPay accounts and all the rest of it. So, I don't know. It's an interesting thing.
There's
Watch this
definitely
space,
something there.
that's all. I thought. Yeah. And Google has announced an agents payments protocol, which, sorry, I'm not really excited about. This reminds me of the Microsoft ICE. It's a payment protocol that will allow agent-to-agent confirmation. So their view of the future is that we will have agents who will be our concierge acting on our behalf, buying or selling stuff for us, and therefore we need to have some protocol. Now, Adam Curry was the one who highlighted this to me on Mastodon, so I thought I'd have a look at it. I'm not sure whether this is going to be the replacement for Lightning. I'm not sure whether this is a replacement for stablecoins or whether it will use micropayments, bitcoins, and stablecoins. It's too early. But if you're interested, this is the tech section. Then it's called the Agents Payment Protocol, AP2. Go and have a look at it. It's from Google.
Yes, and there is something which may or may not be part of that, but Kaji, the website that I use as a Google replacement for search, because it's much, much better, Kaji has done something interesting only in the last month or so. In the AI answers, if you end a query with a question mark, it will go off and use its own AI and give you an AI answer, but it gives you the references obviously underneath. Now it's giving you proportional source attribution. So it can actually say, okay, I got 63% of the information that I used to produce this answer from this website and 20% from this website and so on and so forth, which is interesting. And then they added underneath that, more importantly, this technology paves the way down the road for Kaji to share profits with publishers participating in our AI answers. This would happen automatically for all websites with no deals and no contracts needed. Now, I've no idea how any of that works, but in terms of the idea of, okay, I've got 63% of this information from this website, so therefore any money that I've earned from that search, I should share 63% with that website. I think that sounds quite interesting. So there's definitely something going on there. So, again, worth a peek at what the mad fools at Kaji are doing, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, it's very similar to what we did with the wallet splits.
Yeah.
The ability to, have multiple recipients in the value tag. It's quite interesting.
No, I think there's definitely something there.
What else is going on, James? In the other news, Pod Analyst is a brand new tool launched today. Who are they, James?
They are, well, it's an interesting new product that helps podcasters unify their analytics across Apple, Spotify and YouTube. It's an ex-Odyssey exec and an ex-Cadence 13 exec, is my understanding. And if you are a podcast with under 1,000 listeners, you can use that product free forever. Well, forever until you get more than 1,000 listeners, one would assume. But it sounds like, a bumper dashboard if you can't afford a bumper dashboard. So that looks quite interesting. Also in the news, a thing called Clear My Voice, which says that it'll eliminate noise, filler words, long pauses, and mouth sounds, and many more. You get a 30-minute free trial, and the service is $5 for 5 hours, $5.50 for 5 hours, which is interesting to take a peek at. I would also point out that Auphonic gives you 2 hours free every single month, which is worthwhile as well. And the conversation with Jeanine was treated with Auphonic after I managed to do my usual and record using the wrong microphone. So that was a thing. And finally, talking about AI audio enhancements, here's another one from PodSqueeze. This one's entirely free, and that removes background noise, filler words, and silences. You can go and give that a play if you like. You'll find it on the PodSqueeze website, and yeah, it looks quite smart if you want to give that a go too.
I like the fact that people have done these things, but I just go, they are just features of a bigger function, right? Or an app.
I agree.
So I don't quite understand why you would do them as standalone things, because it just adds more work to the podcaster who then has to take the content from A to B back to A. I mean, call me old-fashioned.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you want to eliminate noise and filler words and long pauses, then just turn on the co-host feature in Buzzsprout, because Buzzsprout will do exactly that for you. As soon as you upload a podcast, as soon as I upload this one, then it automatically does all of that stuff. We even use it to remove filler words as well, and it does a pretty good job of doing that too. So give that a go with our sponsor, or obviously there's a bunch of other tools doing that too. And I would agree, it works much better if it's just built into your podcast host. Yes. It makes total sense.
Now, a couple of things that I spotted around the web. The European cookie law that made a mess of the internet. Looks like Brussels wants to fix it. If you're in Europe and you go to any web page, practically you get a banner appearing which says accept or reject the cookies, and nobody knows why they are accepting or rejecting it really. So they all click accept, or they try not to, and then it says you can't access the page. This doesn't happen obviously in the US, but a lot of US companies then withdrew their access in Europe to the pages because of it. So it looks like the EU is considering removing the need for cookie banners. Hooray, at last, thank God.
Yes, although, if you coded your website properly and stopped spying on your visitors, you wouldn't need them anyway.
Exactly.
So I don't use them, and so therefore there's no cookie banners on the Podnews website. That much I can tell you, because we don't use any sort of tracking from that point of view. So yes, but good news for that at least. Also good news if you like AI voices telling you something that you're too lazy to read. No, there may be a good reason for that, not least if you can't see very well, or indeed if you are currently driving somewhere. If you use Chrome on Android phones, you can now use a built-in feature in Chrome to listen to an AI-powered overview of the web page that you're reading, which is quite smart. So you can give that a go. That's just recently been rolled out. It's essentially Notebook LM, but built into Chrome. So that's an interesting thing.
Now, you spotted something from Dave Weiner. What's Rumpelstiltskin up to?
So he has produced feeds from a new product of his. One of the RSS feeds that he's producing has a thing called source:_markdown, which is the description element, but the description element in Markdown. So Markdown, if you don't know, really easy, simple, straightforward way to write for the internet. It includes links. It includes, things like bold and italic, but it doesn't include everything that you would get in HTML. And more importantly, it's humanly readable as well, even if you don't have Markdown. So that looks quite interesting, because the current practice of HTML in the description fields for podcasts does actually make it very difficult if you want to do a decent job of showing what those show notes are in a podcast app. And so if you just had Markdown and it was simple, straightforward Markdown, then that would be much easier to end up showing. So I thought that was quite interesting. It turns out that Nathan Gathright tells me that I shouldn't be excited by it. So we will not be.
That's it. Although
we will not be excited.
Although I do like Nathan, because he did point out that when we were talking about the AI tag stuff and the person tag, he said True Fans has already implemented. I went, yes, we have. And so somebody quite nicely said True Fans AI already implemented. Anyway, moving on.
Boostergram, super comments, zaps, fan mail, super chats, and email. Our favorite time of the week, it's the Podnews Weekly Review inbox.
Yeah, so many different ways to get in touch with us. Fan mail by using the link in our show notes, super comments on True Fans or boosts everywhere else, or email, and we share the money that we make just between Sam and I, for this is a licensed product of the Podnews world and not part of Podnews itself. So tons of boosts and super comments, which is very exciting. 1, 2, 3, 4 sats from Silas on Linux saying, I'm incredibly upset hearing James have faster and more stable internet on an aeroplane compared to my crap German internet connection at home. Well, there you go. Sorry about that. That's just the way that it works.
I'm sure Starlink works at home as well if you want to pay for it, Silas.
Yeah, I mean, it was Nazi internet though, so you don't get.
He's in Germany. You can't say that. You can't say that.
Oh no, you're right. No, you're absolutely right. Too soon. Too soon. A row of ducks from the ugly quacking duck. It's nice to hear from Bruce again. I hope that my wallet is working again. It is. Keep Podnews going. 73. Thank you very much. Yes, it's wonderful to hear from you again, and hope that things are good. That came in through Podcast Guru. 1,000 sats from Fountain from RW Nash. Go podcasting, I think. Yes. Go podcasting. Exactly right.
2,596 sats from Seth. Happy birthday, Sam Sethy. Thank you very much. Yes, happy birthday to me. Shh. Next year we'll talk about it. This year is just a minor number. Minor number. No pension required.
Neil Velio from something that we covered earlier on in this very show. 347 sats. Thanks, Neil. Very generous. He says, this whole Inception Point story highlights something that just makes me bloody angry. Not because the tech is bad, not because AI is a bad thing for podcasting, but Neil Velio continues, in his own opinion, entitled people like Jeanine think that they can make bad product after bad product and carry on with their self-serving agendas, and there's nobody keeping them accountable. And that's why I love this show, Podnews, and what James is doing to help rid our industry of these bad actors.
Oh, James, right. I've got nothing to do. Hello, Tonto.
Neil Velio with his own opinion there. Yes. Silas on Linux, a row of ducks. Months ago, James said Visa and MasterCard are the internet's money, a take that I strongly dislike, even if for many areas it's true. There you go. Doesn't mean it should be that way, but because it is. And one final set of sats, 5,150 from Matt Cundall, who I saw last week in Calgary. Thanks for your words on Todd Cochran. I recall there was a time when Todd didn't see the value in value for value. Then he listened to a few people and pivoted into being one of its biggest supporters. Agreed. And I think that the art of changing your mind is a good thing for everybody. So I'm pleased to see that. I'm pleased to see you recognise that. And it was excellent to see Matt at Calgary last week as well.
Can I just point out one observation, James, from what you've just read out? We got sats from Fountain, Podcast Guru, and True Fans, and we have not seen in previous weeks many payments from Fountain, many payments from Podcast Guru. I think it's great that it looks like the sats and the payments are coming in from multiple apps, not just from True Fans, which has been the case for the last couple of weeks.
Yes, no, it's really good to see all of that money coming in. But you're right, it really is only those three apps which are being used, but 3 is better than nothing. Mike Dell was the last person to send us sats all the way back in July from Castomatic. And I think Mike was the only user of Castomatic to have boosted us, certainly over the last 6 or so months. And similarly, we're seeing exactly the same sort of thing going on in terms of streams as well. So So yes, worth a peek. You can support us that way. You can also obviously support us by becoming a power supporter. Weekly.podnews.net is where to do just that. Thank you to John Spurlock, the brainiest man in podcasting, for being our 23rd supporter. So thank you for that. Thank you also for other supporters, including Rachel Corbett, Neil Velio, and Jim James for your very kind support. And I think Mr. Cundall is in there as well, isn't he? Somewhere,
he is,
Matt
yes.
Cundall, yes, hidden away in there somewhere. I can't quite see him in front of me, but yes. So all of those lovely people, you can join them too. That would be super helpful. And my goodness, we might need it soon. So see what you can do there. Weekly.podnews.net would be very helpful. So what's happened for you this week, Sam?
Well, we pushed out the new dedicated awards page, which is great. And yes, you said earlier that it will take a lot of work. What was most annoying is none of the awards sites contained an OPML export option. The only site I was going to say it, apart from yours truly,
yes,
Podnews
yes,
Daily.
Thank you.
Yes, well done you.
Yes, we've got OPML exports for any list of podcasts that we make. The code is really simple. If I can see more than one podcast being linked to on this page, make an OPML export. But it seems to work quite well.
It does.
Yes.
What's nice is we also have an OPML import and export on the playlist page. So, yeah.
Nice. Well, that works.
We've added support for private feeds. So me harumphing about Patreon earlier, but we have to support it because it's the way that people do it right now. But I do not like private feeds. I do not like the way that we do things. I think RSS has to support both freemium and premium within the same feed. I believe that. We do it really well with chapters. We do it with transcripts. We do it with pod rolls. We do publisher feeds. Nobody else doing it. And I think adding premium content or secure RSS is something hosts should be doing, because I think there's money in them hills. Why give it all to Patreon? Why can't Buzzsprout or RSS Blue or any of them, right, implement it, and then they get the premium content actually in their hosting service rather than sending it all over to Patreon?
I don't know why you've never mentioned this before, Sam.
Do you think I've got a little bugbear? Maybe. Anyway, James, what's happened for you this week?
I have flown home. I ended up just basically going, you know what? I can't be bothered to fly all the way home from Calgary to Chicago to London, then over to Singapore, and it was going to be like a day and a half in a plane. And I thought, you know what? Right. No. So I ended up very last minute just buying myself a quick flight home, the quick way round from Calgary to San Francisco and then home from there, which was definitely a good idea, even if, as you can probably tell, I've caught quite the cold. So there we are. But gosh, yes, and I was in the back seat of one of the big planes. And that was interesting. I've never been in the back row of a long haul flight before. It turns out that if you are a platinum flyer in the back row, you get treated like somebody else. It's amazing. Yeah. You get special treatment all the time.
Right.
Yeah. So that was definitely a good thing. If you want to read a trip report, some people like them, so why not? You'll find that on my personal blog, james.cridland.net/blog, where you can read that and also read other tedious things about radio and all kinds of things.
The only thing I've ever caught on a plane's COVID, and that's coming to see you.
Well, yes, I was genuinely thinking that this was COVID, but because goodness, I couldn't really do very much yesterday. Anyway, feeling much better today, and both of the tests that I've taken so far tell me it's not COVID, so that's all right. And that's it for this week. All of our podcast stories taken from the Podnews daily newsletter at podnews.net.
You can support this show by streaming sats. You can give us feedback using the Buzzsprout fan mail link in our show notes. You can send us a super comment or boost, or better still, become a power supporter like the 23andMe superfans at weekly.podnews.net.
Our music is from TM Studios. Our voiceovers, Sheila D. Our audio is recorded using Clean Feed. We edit with Hindenburg, and we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Start podcasting, keep podcasting.
And that's disclosure for you.
Get updated every day Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Podnews Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.